there's a scripture reading that is going to kind of kick us off today. And this is from the Gospel of John, chapter 7. And it reads, "On the last and most important day of the festival, Jesus stood up and shouted, 'All who are thirsty should come to me. All who believe in me should drink. As the scripture said concerning me, rivers of living water will flow out from within him.' Jesus said this concerning the Spirit. Those who believed in him would soon receive the Spirit, but they hadn't experienced the Spirit yet, since Jesus hadn't yet been glorified." And now I'd like to welcome Stephen up to give us the message.
Hey, it's good to be with you guys tonight. If we haven't met, my name is Stephen, and I'm actually a pastor at a different church here in town, down in the Bonnie Bray Wash Park neighborhood. It's called New Denver Church. I was part of planting that church 12 years ago, and we have a real heart and passion to see healthy churches planted all around the city. So we've been partnering with Chuck and Katie. They've been part of our church planting residency for almost 9 months now, I think. So we just want to see Nova grow and flourish, and have been excited to see that happening as you guys have gotten started. And as you might know, if you're a regular, Chuck and Katie are out this week at a wedding, so I'm filling in for them. So if you're new or visiting and you don't like tonight, come back next week because it'll be way better, because they'll be back. So tonight we're continuing this series that you guys have been in for a little while called Wild. And so we've been talking about the idea of the Holy Spirit, which is God's unseen presence in us and in the world, and what God does in ways that are just unexpected. And we're going to talk about this verse that Kelsey just read in just a minute. But before we do, I want to ask you a question. When was the last time, just think about this, when was the last time you were really thirsty? I mean, like, really thirsty. Like, you know, that really dry mouth, like your tongue's starting to swell. Like, you just need some water. Think about that. Last weekend, I saw this in my son. So my son is 16, and he plays soccer, and last year was a tournament to end the season. If you remember last weekend, it was hot, like as hot as today, probably a little bit hotter. And he had 2 games on Saturday, so 2 90-minute soccer games in the heat. I mean, oh my gosh, to be 16 again and have that much energy, to be able to run that much. And his first game was on like a synthetic turf field. It's just like the one across the street over here. If you've ever been on one of those when it's hot, so it's basically like this fake grass, and they pour these little like crunched up pieces of rubber on top of it. And when it gets hot, it just soaks up all the heat, and it gets like 10 or 15 degrees hotter. And then the fumes come out. It's horrible. My son said he could feel his feet getting hot when he was playing. So he finished the game, and he brought this huge jug of water, and he drank the whole thing. He's like, "Dad, I got to go get some more water because I have another game." So he bought 2 big 1-liter things of water at 7-Eleven, and I watched him just like completely kill one of those liters of water. I didn't know that much water could fit into a 16-year-old boy, but he did. I mean, he just killed it, crushed it all the way down. And you know, water is our most fundamental human need. It's what we need more than anything else. I mean, if you don't have food, it'll take you a few days to die. But if you don't have water, you'll die so much more quickly. I mean, it is the thing that we need more than anything else. And if you think about our basic needs, we all have basic needs, right? Like needs for food, we have needs for water, we need shelter and clothing and protection. There was a psychologist who wrote about this that actually recognized that human beings are driven to fulfill needs. Driven to meet whatever our needs are that are in front of us. And once one set of needs are met, we just start pursuing the next ones. And so this guy, Abraham Maslow, he talked about our hierarchy of needs. That like when you get all the water you need, and you get all the food you need, and you've got clothes, and you got a nice place to live, you start thinking about what's next, right? Like you start thinking about friendships and relationships. You start thinking about your belonging and your place in the community. Maybe you start to think about your work. What do you do? You just have freedom to be able to think about that. If you're hungry, you can't think about that stuff. But every human being, as their needs are successively met, it's not as if our desires go away. They just keep getting more and more until we start looking for purpose, things like purpose and meaning. Why are we here? That's sort of the top of the pyramid. And that thirst is inside of us. Every human being who has ever lived has different ideas about how they go about pursuing those thirsts, those desires for what does it mean beyond the basics of life? What does it mean to live a flourishing, abundant human life? What is the good life? What does it mean to live a good life? What does it mean to be a good person? These are questions that people have asked for a long, long time. And in the verse we're going to take a look at tonight, the one we just read, what we'll see is that Jesus spoke into this thirst, this desire that we all have for an abundant, flourishing human life. So before we go back to the verse and I go through with you, I need to set up the context so you understand what's going on. Because when you just read a verse like this, we're just missing so much because the Bible is an ancient book written in another language from a different time. And if you don't know what's going on, you can miss some of the significance that's happening. So first thing that we have to know is that in this verse, it's important to recognize that Jesus and his closest followers had traveled from where they lived in the northern part of Israel down to like the capital city of Jerusalem. Now, at this time, Israel was not an independent nation. They were ruled by Rome. So this was really more like a province, like a state. But Jerusalem was like the city of government. It was where the Roman officials were. It was the center of religion. It was where the Jewish leaders were. It's where the temple was. It was where the center of commerce was. So everybody came to Jerusalem. But they especially came at appointed times during the year where there were festivals. So there were three primary festivals that Jews celebrated during this time and that they celebrate today. And one of them was called the Feast of Tabernacles. It's a feast that's still celebrated today by Jewish people around the world. It takes place in the fall. Actually, I looked it up. This year it starts on September 20th. You may have heard it called Sukkot, S-U-K-K-O-T. It's also known as the Feast of Tabernacles. Sukkot is the Hebrew word for a tent, for a tabernacle, a place to dwell. And what the reason it's called that is the festival is a time of remembrance for people from Israel when they would look back to remember their greatest story, the Exodus story. Now, you all know this story, whether you read it in the Bible or whether you saw the Ten Commandments and Charlton Heston or the cartoon version, Prince of Egypt. You know that this is a central story in Israel's history where Moses, God uses Moses to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and they spend 40 years in the desert. And so while they're in the desert for 40 years, guess what? It's a desert. And in a desert, what do you need more than anything else? Basic human need. Water. Yes, not a trick question. You need water. And so God provides that for them in some miraculous ways. So in this Feast of Tabernacles, one of the things that they would do that was a symbolic part of this festival every year is the priest would go down and he would go to this pool that existed where people would draw water in Jerusalem. And they would get a pitcher of water and there would be a procession up to the temple and he would pour this water on the altar. And it was symbolizing the way that God had poured out provision and provided for the Israelites in the desert. So this is the point at the story that we step into where Jesus, on the eighth day, on the climactic day, when this ritual of pouring this water on the altar is taking place, it says John, the man who wrote this book, which if you're not familiar with the Bible, this book comes from a book called John, which was written by one of Jesus' first followers. So he was an eyewitness to the things that he wrote. It's one of the four accounts of Jesus' life. And it's his recollection of what happened on that day. And John says, on the last and the greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood up and said in a loud voice, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scriptures have said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." So this is a bold statement from Jesus because there was this expectation that was built into the Feast of Tabernacles where they would pour this water on the altar and they would remember God's promise and his deliverance in the past, the way that he provided for them in the past when they were in the desert. And there was a promise that God had made through the prophets that said in the future, Jerusalem will be a source of living water. That Jerusalem will be a blessing to the whole world. The Israelite people will be a blessing to the whole world. And Jesus is now standing up in the middle of this Jewish festival, at the height of this festival, and saying, that was about me. This promise is about me. The promise for living water is about me. If anyone is thirsty, come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, rivers of living water will flow from them. And then, interestingly, John, the author, provides us some commentary. He gives us some comments on what Jesus says. He says, by this, he, Jesus, meant the Spirit of God, whom those who believed in him were to later receive. Up to that time, the Spirit had not been given, since Jesus had not yet been glorified. So what John is saying is that Jesus wasn't talking about actual water. So I think we probably could have gathered this, that Jesus is not saying, hey, if you're thirsty, I'll come give you a drink. He's speaking to deeper thirst that is within us. He's speaking to that basic human need that we all have for an abundant, flourishing life. And he's saying, if you're thirsty, if you feel like you lack, if you feel like you have desires that are unfulfilled, if you feel like your life lacks meaning or purpose or connection to something bigger, come to me. Come to me, and rivers of living water will flow from within you. And John makes this connection, and he says, this is about the Spirit of God. That Jesus was speaking about what was going to happen in the future for all of his followers after his death and his resurrection, and Jesus sends the Spirit of God, the unseen power and presence of God, into the world, and makes this opportunity for all who believe in him to receive God's Spirit in us. He says, when that happens, there's this source of living water that's going to well up within us, and that's going to feed these deepest desires. So, if that's true, if we believe that that's true, that's good news for us tonight. It's good news because that's available to us. The quenching of our deepest desires and our deepest thirst is available to us. But here's maybe a more important question. Why does that not feel more true? Why does it feel like in my life and your life, sometimes it's not enough to just believe and have faith in Jesus, or even to follow and practice the ways of living that he taught us? It still feels like there's some hollowness or emptiness, that desire, that thirst doesn't really go away. Why is it that sometimes our longings feel unfulfilled? Well, it's a tough question. And the question is probably as different as, the answer to that question is probably as different as everyone who's here in the room. But I think finding the answer begins with asking, what is it that I'm longing for? What is it that I'm thirsty for? What is it that I really want? And where am I going to fulfill that need or that desire? So whatever, if this is a universal human action, that we all have this need or this desire to fulfill whatever our needs are, and then we seek something else, then we have to ask ourselves, what are those things that we're trying to fulfill, and where are we going to get it fulfilled? Because I think often, at least in my life, I recognize I go to places to meet needs and desires, and I go to places that they'll never be satisfied. They'll never be filled. It's a little bit like, if you think about that, back to that moment where I asked you about when was the last time you were really, really thirsty. Like maybe you went on a hike or a run, or you'd been outside on a hot day and you came inside and you just thought, I'm so thirsty. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sit down and eat a big bowl of pretzels right now. Oh man, I'm just going to eat these pretzels. But strangely, the more pretzels that I eat, my thirst doesn't seem to go away, right? Why is that? Because pretzels are never going to quench your thirst. It's not a good source to go to, right? And it sounds ridiculous and silly, but I just think about in my own life about ways that I seek to fulfill these longings and desires from sources and places that are just never going to fulfill me. So maybe for us, it's, if you think about your life and your work, Kelsey, you talked about like asking sometimes about, why can't I make more money? I mean, and I think in some of that is we think, if I just made a little bit more money, then I would be more satisfied. Yeah, then I'd be good. Right, then I could pay my bills, and then I wouldn't have any problems, and things would be good. Or maybe it's about like the promotion. Like you work really hard, you pour yourself into getting a promotion because you want to be that person who's leading in your department or looked at as somebody who's in charge. But isn't it weird, like you get a raise, and somehow or another you still have bills, and somehow or another you still have lack and need, and never quite is enough. And you get the promotion, and then it's satisfying for a little bit, but then that kind of fades or goes away. Or maybe it's possessions or things. You really think, I'm so sick of my broken down car. If I could just get a new car, then things would be better. I would be satisfied. And then you get that new car. You save for it, you work for it, and you get it. And then pretty soon your new car is just your car. You know, it fades, right? That satisfaction goes away. Or maybe it's relationships, right? Sometimes we look to one another. We look to people. We get in dating relationships, and we think this is the person who I want to spend my life with, and they just fulfill me in such a way that nobody else has. And so you commit to marry that person. And then you look over at the person one day, and you just think, why did I marry you? Like, why? What am I doing? I'm not getting out of this what I thought I was going to get. And the reason is we can't fulfill one another's needs or desires. At the deepest place in all of us, there is a thirst and there is a desire that only God can fill. So we're going to take a few minutes. I'm going to ask Sarah to come back up. We want to provide an opportunity for a time of reflection because this looks different in all of our lives. I want you to take a few minutes to reflect on a couple questions. The first is, what is it that you want? What is it you're thirsty for tonight? What is it that you're desiring? What is it that you just think, if I just had this thing, then things would be so much better? And then I want you to think, where are you going? Where are you looking to, maybe other than God, to have that thirst fulfilled? Take a few minutes and reflect on that.